Hello everyone and welcome to yet another edition of Hello Educator. Today's episode is from Mango Science Radio and the story is about Mercury and Venus. The story is brought to you by Obuli Chandran.
Hi, Mango Science Radio listeners, Obuli Chandran here. So I'm going to share a very interesting historic prediction by a very famous scientist of a celestial phenomena that happened in 17th century. But before that, I would like to draw your attention to eclipses. I'm sure all of you who are listening to this have heard of eclipses, and some of you will also know about it. I'm not going to go into explaining in detail about eclipses. But solar eclipse, I'm just going to briefly tell you what a solar eclipse is. It's when the moon moves in front of the sun, it blocks the sun out of our view. When it does it so completely, you call it a total solar eclipse. And when it does it partly, you call it a partial solar eclipse. And also you have annular solar eclipse. So now, just like how moon can move in front of the sun, blocking the sun out of the view, there are planets that can move in front of the sun. But planets are very small and very far away from the earth that they will never block the sun out. So rather it would look like a very small piece of dot that is moving across the surface of the sun from our point of view. So you call them planetary transits, and easily understandably so that not all the planets will move in front of the sun from our point of view, because there are a lot of planets that are away from us and some planets that are closer to sun than we are to sun. So in this case, in our solar system, we have Venus and Mercury that are orbiting closer to the sun than Earth is. So it so happens that it is possible that Venus can align with Earth and Sun, so that from our point of view, we can observe the Venus moving in front of the Sun. And it is also possible, the same thing is possible for the planet Mercury. You call it Mercury transits and you call it Venus transits. However, these events are rather very rare to observe. And in our ancient cultures, people have not been able to observe these transits because it's rather too small to observe with naked eye. If you had a really sharp eye and if you had a solar glass that can aid you, then it's quite easy to observe. But otherwise, it's extremely difficult to observe these planetary transits. But eclipses are more easy to observe because the moon is quite big and it can block the sun. So for this reason, you don't have any mention of planetary transits much earlier, but there are some reports in 11th or 12th century, but not very conclusive. But the very first prediction was made by this particular scientist called Johannes Kepler. I'm sure you've heard of this name quite often if you're learning your physics or science in the 6th grade or 7th grade. Kepler is a very popular name. So Kepler is famously known for his Keplerian laws, the Kepler's laws of motion. So where he said the orbits of planets are elliptical instead of circular, and couple of other laws connecting to planetary motion. So using his knowledge that he's gained, and when he came up with the Keplerian laws of motion, he predicted using his laws that the planets Venus and Mercury will transit the sun in 1631. This he predicted in 1627. In 1627 he predicted that Venus and Mercury both will transit the sun in the same year, 1631. Like 1 month apart. The Venus will transit in the month of December and Mercury would transit a month earlier in November in 1631. But unfortunately, he did not live to observe it because he died in 1630. But some other astronomers observed the Mercury transit in 1631. But unfortunately, they could not observe the Venus transit as it was completely cloudy over the entire Europe during December in 1631. So no one was able to record any observations of Venus transits. But 8 years later in 1639, another Venus transit would occur. That was observed, and yes, by some other astronomers as well. But the interesting thing is the ability to predict that a planetary object, where a planet can move in front of the sun. And that too, of course, his prediction was off by about 5 hours to what was actually observed. But back then it was an astonishing feat. No one had observed it before. And he just predicted using his laws that planets would transit. And luckily, and this has never happened in the history. It's not never happened in the history, recorded history, that both the transits have occurred in the same year. That is an extremely, like when I say extremely, it's like super duper extremely rare event. It probably happens in once in thousands of years. Such a kind of rare events. So this showed the power of the ability of the laws to predict things. Eventually, the calculations were more refined and more accurate predictions were done. So now we have the predictions for all these planet transits for several years to come. But I would also like to, I wanted to share a very interesting historical prediction. Now that I have shared it, now I want to share with you one of my most amazing experiences and also one of the most disappointing regrets that I have. One of the regrets is that I missed observing the planet Venus's transit in 2012. So the planet Venus transits happened in 2004 and then in 2012 with a gap of 8 years. But unfortunately, I was not into astronomy back then. So I just started my journey into astronomy in 2013. So I was just 1 year late. But I couldn't see it 2012. So what is the big disappointment? I might always see the next Venus transit, but unfortunately the next Venus transit is in 2117. So which is like more than 100 years away. So which is probably, I'm not sure if I'm going to be there that long. So for all practical reasons, I'm never going to observe a Venus transit again. So this is one of the biggest regrets that I have. 1 year I could have, had I known of gotten the interest, I would have observed the Venus transits. So Venus transits are extremely rare. Like as you can see, once a transit occurs, in the next 8 years you'll get another transit. But for the next transit to occur, it takes almost 121 years or 122 years to occur on an average. Yes. So this is the biggest regret that I have. On the other hand, the other amazing, how lucky I was, the amazing opportunity that I had was to observe a Mercury transit. The Mercury transit is also rare, but not as rare as a Venus transit. So last Mercury transit happened in 2019 in November, on November 11th. But unfortunately, it was not visible from our country, India. But I, along with my Mango Astronomy Club kids, we had gone to Mauritius to observe the Mercury transits. And luckily, the weather was cooperative. And we were able to see the small dot of Mercury moving across the sun. And it was a terrific experience. And I still cherish it. The next Mercury transit will happen in 2033 or 2034. I guess in another 13 years from now. But again, it's not like Venus transit that we won't be able to see it again. But the next transit will luckily be visible from our country as well. So I'm looking forward to that. Yes, so that's about it. So to give you a small recap, Johannes Kepler, he came up with his Keplerian laws of motion and he used it to predict the planetary transits. And luckily, it was so lucky that both the transits happened on the same year, which is like happens in once in thousands of years. But unfortunately, Kepler was not alive to see them. And the second part of the thing was like I was lucky and both unlucky for observing Mercury transit and not observing Venus transits. So until then, I'll catch you again with another interesting story next time. Bye.
We sincerely hope that you really like this episode. We upload one science story every day, and if you are a science enthusiast and you would like to contribute to Mango Science Radio, please WhatsApp us at 99522435541. And you can also share your feedback, via an audio message or WhatsApp. That would really be helpful. Thank you again. Thank you so much for listening to Hello Educator. I will see you tomorrow.